All right, let's start part 2 of lesson 12. We're going to keep going with our discussion on decimals. So here we go. Let's talk about how to add and subtract decimals by hand. We're not going to do a ton of these because the reality is probably most of you will be using calculators on this part, but I want to show it to you because it's a skill that some of you may need, especially those of you that might be taking the ALEX placement exam. If you decide that you want to take that again to try to get ahead, then you're going to probably need to know how to do this. So I do want to show it to you. If in fact you're sitting there thinking, I'm just going to do all of these using my calculator, then feel free, of course, to skip this part of the video. But here is how you add and subtract decimals by hand. What you have to do first is line up the decimal points vertically. The decimal points vertically. All right, so line up the decimal points vertically. And then I'll put this in parentheses, check by estimating. And that's not something you have to do, but it's something that's like a good idea to do, because if you get an answer that doesn't make any sense when you estimate the answer, then you know you probably did something wrong, and probably what happened was you didn't line up the decimals perfectly. So it's a great idea to check when possible. So let's do some examples. Add or subtract. And that's pretty much all the directions we'll say in the homework, add or subtract. And then of course you can estimate and check your answers for reasonableness. We'll kind of do that a little bit together. I'm not going to show you how to do this on the calculator because it's very straightforward, of course. When you're adding and subtracting in a calculator, like for example, this one, 5.6 plus 2.1, all you have to do literally is just type in 5.6 plus 2.1, hit equals, and it will give you the answer. So I'm not going to waste your time with that. But here's our first example, 5.6 plus 2.1. The first thing that we wrote down is line up the decimal points vertically. That is so important. So you take your first one, 5.6, and that means if you have one more that you're adding to it, I would put the decimal place down before I did anything else if I were you guys. I would just go ahead and put that decimal right under the other one just to make sure that we don't make a mistake. This one happens to have the same amount of decimal places as the one above it, but that doesn't always happen. So here we have a 2.1, and we're gonna go ahead and just put an addition sign there. And if I were you guys as well, I would go ahead and put a decimal in my answer, put the decimal place in my answer so that that's all lined up perfectly so that I don't make a mistake at the end. And so now you just do 6 plus 1, which is 7. And then you do 5 plus 2, which is also 7. And notice that decimal place just stays right there, and your final answer is 7.7. If you keep those decimal places perfectly lined up vertically, then you probably will not make any mistakes on these. All right, example number 2. Let's do one that's just a little tougher. 8.2 plus 2.15. All right, again, what you want to do here is line up the decimals. So I've got an 8.2. I always just kind of start with the first one because order doesn't really matter. So 8.2, and then I've got one more, so I'm going to go ahead and put my decimal right under that just so I don't mess this up. And now I've got 2.15, so 2.15, and then I'm going to go plus, make my thing there, and I'm going to go ahead and put my decimal in my answer right now, right under the other two decimals, just to make sure that my answer is good. One other thing you can do, you don't have to do this, but I like to do this. I like to put a 0. I like to fill in zeros in any blank spaces that I have, again, just so that I can avoid confusion. So if I were you guys, I might put a 0 right here since you're allowed to. Remember, you're allowed to add as many zeros as you want at the end of a decimal. So I'm just going to fill that in with a 0 so that when I'm adding with the 5 below it, I'm not confused in any way. So now I've got 0 plus 5, which is 5, 2 plus 1, 3, 8 plus 2, 10. And so my final answer is 10.35. Again, notice those decimal points are solid. They don't move. And if we set them up right at the beginning, we are going to be in really good shape. All right, let's try one where we have to actually add 3 decimals. Okay, so 2.39 plus 0.0678 plus 24.6. Okay, so 2.39 plus 0.0678 plus 24.6. Okay, so for this one, again, it's super important that you line up those decimals properly. So I'm going to do 2.39. And then since I have two more numbers that I'm going to be adding to it, I'm going to go ahead and put two more decimals right under the one in my 2.39. Okay, so then for the next one, look where the decimal is. It's way over here, so it's 0.0678. So 0.0678. That's where the decimal was in this one. So we have to make sure that we carefully copy it the same way it was written in the original. And then here you've got 24.6. So that means 0.6 goes here, and then it goes 4.2, right? So 24.6. So it ends up looking like this. Now I'm going to go like that. I'm going to put my decimal right under the other three. Again, line it all up, get it all in a nice order right at the beginning. And then again, feel free to fill in zeros anywhere you want, just so that you don't get confused. So I'm going to go ahead and put 2 zeros here and here. And I'm going to go ahead and put 3 zeros here. You could even put a 0 here if you wanted. Okay, you can fill in zeros anywhere you want so that you don't get confused with blank spaces. Okay, so now when you add, you have 0, 8, and 0. That just equals 8. 0 plus 7 plus 0 is 7. 9 plus 6 plus 0 is 15. Carry the 1. 1 plus 3 plus 6 is 10. Carry the 1. 1 plus 2 plus 4 is 7. And then there's just a 2 here. You could even put zeros here if you wanted, right? 0, 0, and 2. 2. So there you go. So your final answer is 27.0578. Final answer for that one. Okay, good. All right, let's try one more addition problem, and then we'll just do maybe one subtraction problem. Because I think if you get the addition, you'll understand the subtraction pretty well. So, example number 4. Example number 4. Let's do this one. 39 plus 3.006 plus 8.403. All right, so the reason why I wanted to give you one more is because notice this first number here, there is no decimal in it. So that might make it just a little bit tricky. So that means when you line these up, that's a 39. Technically, where would the decimal be? Right here after it. 39.0 technically, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and go point directly underneath it because I have two more numbers to make. And here I've got a 3.006. So I'm going to go 3.006. And this is an 8.403. So 8.4, yikes, 0, 3. There we go. Sorry about that, ugly 4, but that is a 4 right there. I started to write a 0, so there you go. All right, so now, again, you could fill in zeros if you want. You could put 3 zeros up there. You could even put zeros here. Feel free, again, to make as many as you want to make yourself comfortable. And then notice I've got decimal, decimal, decimal. So again, for my answer, I want to make sure that I write that decimal directly under the other 3. That's the most important thing. And so now you've got 0 plus 6 plus 3, that's 9. 0 plus 0 plus 0, 0. 0 plus 0 plus 4, 4. And then here you've got 9 plus 3 plus 8. Okay, that's 20. Carry the 2. And then 2 plus 3 is 5. And that's it. Okay, some zeros in there, but that's all you need. So your final answer is 50.409. All right, when you're doing subtraction, really, you're just doing the same thing as addition. You just want to make sure you line up those decimals perfectly. So, you know what? Maybe we will do 2 subtraction problems just so you guys feel good. Let's do 2 of them. So 654.9 minus 56.67. Now, you do have to be careful when you're doing subtraction. Of course, order does matter. So when you're setting up this problem, the first number that's listed has to go on top. So 654.9 minus, and then if I were you guys right away, I would put that decimal right under the other one so that I don't mess up. Because now I've got 56.67. I'm going to put my 0.67 down first, and then I'm going to do my 56. Okay, so there we go. it looks like that. And then I'm going to put my bar, and then I'm going to go ahead and put my decimal for my answer directly under the other two. And again, filling in zeros might be especially helpful when you're doing subtraction, because you need to know when to borrow and making sure things are real lined up here. So here I've got 0 minus 7. Well, obviously we can't do that. So we're going to have to borrow from the 9. The 9 becomes an 8. The 0 turns into a 10. So now we can do 10 minus 7, 3. 8 minus 6, 2. 4 minus 6, can't do it. We have to borrow from the 5. That turns into a 4. Now we have a 14 here. 14 minus 6, 8. And now I've got 4 minus 5. Again, we can't do it. Borrow from the 6. That turns into a 5. This turns into a 14. 14 minus 5 is 9. And then 5 minus nothing. 5 minus 0, 5. So your final answer is 598.23. All right, let's just do one more. 200 minus 5.6. 200 minus 5.6. Okay, if you're going to set this one up, the 200 goes up here, minus. Now again, notice I gave you another problem where there's no decimal in one of the numbers. The 200 doesn't have a decimal showing, but we know that the decimal technically is at the end of the number. So it's 200.0000, as many zeros as you want to make. So that means for my next number, I need to make sure I put my decimal directly under it, and I'm going to put 5.6. So 5.6. So it has to get lined up like that. I know it looks off center. Sometimes it hurts my eyes to write stuff like that. I'm like, it looks wrong, but it's not. You want to make sure you line up those decimals. And so again, you may want to add a 0 there just to help yourself when you're subtracting by hand. Okay, so here we've got 0 minus 6. We can't do that. So we'd have to borrow, but we can't borrow here. That's a 0. Can't borrow here. This is a 0. So here's one of those situations where you have to go all the way to the end of the number and borrow way back at the beginning. So that 2 becomes a 1. This becomes a 10. Borrow from that, becomes a 9. Now this becomes a 10. Borrow from that, that becomes a 9. Now this becomes a 10. So now we're good to go. 10 minus 6 is 4. And then 9 minus 5 is 4. 9 minus blank minus 0 is 9. 1 minus another blank or a 0 is 1. So your final answer is 194.4. One thing I just want to mention real quick before we move on and talk about how to combine like terms with decimals is that you could also see some problems like this. I'm not going to do this one with you, but let's say you saw something like this. Negative 17.84 plus 8.53. You might see a problem like that, or 2 or 3 in the homework, and they give you one negative and one positive, and the negative is larger than this one, and you're adding. Remember the rules that we talked about several weeks ago now. There was a piece of paper you might remember I passed out, and it had the rules on there. If you want to refer to that and do those by hand, you are more than welcome. You're also very welcome to just use a calculator. Just pop this right into the calculator, do negative 17.84 plus 8.53 equals. It'll give you the answer. You don't have to do any work. If you do want to do it by hand, just follow those rules on that piece of paper that we talked about a while back, where if you have one of each sign, one positive and one negative, that means you're going to have to subtract the two numbers, and then your answer will have the same sign as whichever number originally was higher. So in this case, your answer is going to be negative, and you're going to have to subtract these two numbers. So you would do, I'll just start you off here, you would do 17.84 minus 8.53. Notice my decimals are lined up, okay? And you would have to do it by hand like that, and then your final answer would be negative because your original higher number was negative. So again, if you want to do those by hand, feel free. I usually just like to do all of those using a calculator. Realistically, and moving forward in the math classes that you'll be in the future, you'll always be able to use a calculator. But if you want to deal with doing these, or at least practicing some of these, again, especially for those of you who are going to be taking the ALEX placement test sometime by choice, that is something you may want to just practice by hand a little bit, mixing in those old rules with what we just talked about up here. Okay, so that is pretty much all you guys need to know about adding and subtracting decimals. Let's talk about combining like terms. And you know what? We're only going to actually do one example of this because it's something that is no different than combining like terms with regular numbers. And by regular numbers, I mean integers. Okay, so it's really no different. So we're just going to do one example. All right, so the directions will look like this. It'll say simplify, combine like terms. All right, simplify, combine like terms. So let's just do one example. Example 1, 30.7x plus 17.6 minus 23.9x minus 10.9. Okay, so you could see something like this. Notice some of these terms have an x attached and some of them are just numbers. You might remember what we call just numbers. We call them constants. And so what you want to do when you're starting these problems is ask yourself, what are my like terms? Whatever my like terms are, I'm going to combine those and put those together. So here I've got a 30.7x and here I've got a minus 23.9x. Both of these have an x to the first power attached to them. So that means that they are like terms. Now here's where if I were you guys, I would just take my calculator and do 30.7 minus 23.9. And if you do that, you get 6.8. And just don't forget to put your x on the end because these had x's. Okay, so 6.8x. If you want to do it by hand, you are more than welcome. You could set up a little scratch work off to the side and do 30.7 minus 23.9. Do it by hand. You know how now. So you could do that and you would get the same number, 6.8. 6.8x. Okay, then you'll notice we have some constants here, right? We have a 17.6. We have a minus 10.9. Again, you could feel free to do this by hand or just put it right into the calculator to save yourself time. And when you do that, you get a positive 6.7. So plus 6.7. And that's actually your final answer, 6.8x plus 6.7. So combining like terms with decimals is the same exact process as doing it with integers. So I'm only doing the one example with you because I think you guys are probably good. And if you need more examples, of course, feel free to use the question help key on the homework assignment for lesson 12. Okay, that brings us to multiplying. This is also something I'm going to kind of skip over briefly. Multiplying decimals. Multiplying with decimals. What I would encourage you guys to do, for the most part, is just use a calculator. Anytime they want you to multiply two numbers that are decimals, if I were you, I would just put it right into the calculator. It'll be way quicker, way easier. And again, the reality is moving forward, every class you take moving forward after this one, you will be allowed to use a calculator with something like that. And in fact, you're gonna wanna do that so that you can go quicker and keep up with your instructor in the next course. However, I will show you just one example. Let's just do one by hand. Excuse me, one by hand, just in case, again, those of you that might be taking the ALEX, you might want to know how to do this, you might want to see it, or there might even be some of you that want to do all of these by hand in the homework, and that's totally great. If that applies to you, feel free to do that. Okay, so let me give you this example. Negative 2.3 times 7.65. All right, well, let's do this by hand. This will be our only example that we do by hand because again, it's mostly unnecessary. So first of all, you want to notice that you have a negative times a positive. So before you even start the problem, you should probably ask yourself, is my answer going to be negative or positive? Well, if you're multiplying a positive times a negative, your answer will be negative always. That's a rule that we learned. A negative times a positive is always negative. So I'm going to go ahead off to the side here and make a little spot for my answer. And I'm going to say my answer is going to be negative something. And I'm going to go ahead and circle it right now and get it ready. All right, I'm just going to get it ready because I don't want to make any mistakes at the end. And I don't want to forget that my answer is supposed to be negative. All right, so that's the first thing you want to ask yourself. Is my answer going to be positive or negative? The next thing you want to do is just go ahead and set up the problem like you would with any other multiplication problem. So because there's 3 digits here and only 2 here, I personally like to put the one with more digits on top and the one with less digits on the bottom. But it's not wrong if you do it the other way. You're welcome to do it either way. It'll still work out just fine. So one thing you want to keep in mind when you're multiplying with decimals is that you can ignore the decimals until the end. Okay, that's how you multiply with decimals. You literally are allowed to ignore the decimals until the very end of the problem. And in fact, you probably want to ignore them, otherwise it could mess you up. So we're gonna pretend that these decimals aren't even in the problem right now, and we're just gonna multiply like usual. So 3 times 5 is 15, carry the 1. 3 times 6 is 18, plus 1 is 19, carry the 1. 3 times 7 is 21, plus 1, 22. Okay, so again, I'm ignoring decimals. We don't care about them at all right now. All right, then for my second row, you might remember this. We make a 0, and then we go in 1. You always have to like indent one more each row that you go down. So now we're gonna go 2 times 5 is 10. Carry the 1. I'll just use the same one as I had before. 2 times 6 is 12, plus 1 is 13. Carry the 1. Oh, cool, I can use that one again too. 2 times 7 is 14, plus 1 is 15. And now we add our 2 rows. All right, so here we have 5 plus 0 is 5, 9 plus 0 is 9, 2 plus 3 is 5, 2 plus 5, 7, and then 1 plus nothing or blank up there, a 0 you could put if you wanted is a 1. All right, so this is what we have. But remember, our answer is going to be negative. We knew that from the beginning. And here's where decimals matter. You have to add up the total number of decimal places in the originals. Sorry, I'm reading kind of sideways. I don't know why I'm doing that, but there we go. So we're gonna add the total number of decimal places in the originals. So let's look back up here. That's what I mean by the originals. And we're gonna say, okay, how many total decimal places do we have? Well, in this one, we had 1, 2, right? We had tenths, hundredths, 1, 2. And in this one, we had just 1, just to the tenths place. So the total number of decimal places, 1, 2, 3. So 3. So that means that number is like super important. That means that your final answer, you're gonna put your decimal moving from right to left 3 places. Okay, so right now it's right here, right? It's on the end of the problem, but we have to go 3 to the left. 1, 2, 3. And that's where our final answer decimal place ends up. So my final answer is negative 17.595. Okay, that's your final answer, negative 17.595. Okay, so that's how you do them by hand. So again, if you just follow that process, that'll work for you every time. You just ignore the decimals until the very end of the problem, add up the total of decimal places in the original, and then just go in that many from the end of the problem in that many decimal places to the left, and then that's your final answer. Okay, so here's the very last thing I want to talk to you guys about. There are some special rules for multiplying with decimals by certain specific numbers. And these rules will often help you to create shortcuts in the future, especially when you might happen upon something called scientific notation, which I'm sure you've all heard of. You've probably all done problems with scientific notation in the past. But what I'm about to show you is going to be especially helpful for that. And that does show up again in the future courses that you will be taking. So let's talk about this last topic. What we're supposed to do when we are multiplying by 10, 100, 1,000, etc. Okay? So if you're given a situation where you're multiplying a decimal by 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, okay, just a 1 with a bunch of zeros after it, okay, this just moves your decimal to the right. Your decimal to the right, and I'm going to underline that word right, the same number of places, as zeros. Okay, and then we're going to write one more thing down and then we'll do some examples. Because there's also another shortcut that we want to learn, and that is this. Multiplying by 0.1 0.01, 0.001, etc. Okay. This just moves your decimal. Just moves your decimal to the left. To the left this time. To the left, the same number of places. The same number of places as the position of the 1. Okay, as the same number of of places as the position of the 1. Sorry, I just hit the phone there and it bounced a bit, but hopefully we're okay. All right, so that might not make a ton of sense right now, but let's do some examples, and I think this will make total sense, and then this will be the last thing we discuss for today. If you guys are sticking with me all this time, you are doing great, because there is so much here. There's a lot to this lesson, a lot of little things, a lot of little rules, a lot of different things that you're gonna have to do in the homework. So here we go. Example number 1, 6.51 times 10. Now again, realistically, you could totally take your calculator out here. You could put in 6.51 times 10 equals. It would give you the right answer and it would be very quick. But these rules, like I said, are important, and at some point in time, you may have to know these rules from your memory and not be able to use a calculator. It could even pop up in a science class. So anyway, let's talk about this. 6.51 times 10. We just wrote down up here that if you're multiplying by 10, 100, 1,000, etc., you move your decimal to the right the same number of places as zeros. Well, there's 1 0 here. 1 0. So that means we're going to move this decimal 1 place to the right. So we're just going to take that decimal, we're going to move it to there. So your final answer is 65.1. Okay, so see what we did there? There was 1 0, which means we moved the decimal 1 place to the right. So 65.1. All right, let's talk about another example very similar to that. 7.2 times 100. Okay, so again, you want to ask yourself, how many zeros are in this number here? There's 2 of them. Okay, 2 zeros. So that means that you're going to have to move the decimal 2 places to the right. Well, here's the thing. If you move it 1 place to the right, you run out of numbers. So I'm supposed to move it 2 places to the right, which means I have to go 1, 2. So if I'm going all the way to here, I have to add a 0. So my final answer for this one is 720. So if you run out of numbers, just add zeros, all right? Because you have to go a certain number of decimal places according to the rule. All right, let's do one more like that. Negative 17.604 times 10,000. Okay, let's do that, times 10,000. All right, so this time we have a 1 and a bunch of zeros again. Let's count the zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4. You've got 4 zeros. So that means you're going to take this decimal and move it 4 to the right. So 1, 2, 3. We run out of numbers, so I have to add 1 number, 4. I have to add 1 0. So my final answer is negative because the original was negative. So negative 176,040. And then it ends up being the number negative 176,040. All right, so there's that one. All right, let's just do 3 more examples. These go pretty quick. 3 more examples. This time I'm going to do one where we're multiplying by a decimal. So we're going to have to move the decimal to the left. Okay, so how about one like this? 23.4 times 0.1. Okay, so we wrote up here, if you're multiplying by 0.1, 0.01, 0.001, and so on and so forth, you move your decimal to the left, the same number of places as the position of the 1. Here's what I mean by that. If you look at the position of the 1, how many decimal places in is the 1? Well, it's only 1 decimal place, right? It's only 1 decimal place past the decimal. So that means you're only going to move this 1 decimal place to the left this time. So your final answer is 2.34. 2.34. Okay, cool. All right, so then let's just do 2 more. Again, these go pretty quick. Honestly, once you kind of learn the rules, it goes pretty much equally as fast as using a calculator. Maybe even faster sometimes, depending on how many buttons you have to press. Okay, how about one like this? Negative 9.83 times negative 0.01. I'm using parentheses this time because I've got some negatives involved. So for this one, it looks worse than it is. The first thing you want to notice is the fact that you're multiplying 2 negatives. And if you're multiplying 2 of anything that's the same sign, that means your answer is going to be positive no matter what. So my answer is going to be positive. So if you want, you could even go like that, just to remind yourself that your answer will be positive. And now you can look at this and you can say, okay, well, remember, I need to figure out how many places past the decimal my 1 is. So it's 1, 2, right? Your 1 is 2 decimal places in. 2 decimal places. So that means I have to move this decimal place 2 to the left. 1, 2. Now I run out of numbers, so I have to add a 0. So my final answer is 0.0983. And remember, it's positive because we had a negative times a negative. That's positive. Okay, cool. We're going to do just one last problem. So we are almost done. Example number 6. How about this one? Parentheses 5.23 times negative 0.001. So what about one like this? Well, you might notice something right away. We've got a positive times a negative. When that happens, positive times negative, your answer will be negative. Whenever you have one of each and you're multiplying, your answer is going to be negative. So right away, you might want to put that negative down so you don't forget about it, because that would really stink to lose those points on my math lab. Okay, so now we have to look at the position of the 1 and we ask ourselves, what is the position? How many decimal places in is that 1? 1, 2, 3, right? It's 3 places past the decimal. 1, 2, 3. So that means that we're going to have to go over here and move this decimal 3 to the left. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3. Notice I run out of numbers pretty quick. I have to add 2 zeros this time because I didn't have enough numbers. So my final answer is negative 0.00523. Final answer for that one. So just be real careful when you're counting your zeros. And of course, you guys are always welcome to use your calculator to do the entire problem, or if nothing else, just to check your answer. So feel free to do that. And that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you for bearing with me. That was a lot of stuff. That was a long lesson, and that covers most of our topic of decimals. So we got through quite a bit today, and hopefully this helps you guys on your lesson 12 homework and your quiz 6 coming up. All right, good luck, and I will post this very soon. All right, take care, guys. Hope you're all safe and healthy still, and I just wish you guys all the best, even though this really is a crazy time. So, all right, guys, stay healthy, and I'll be in touch. Bye-bye.